What does it mean to have healthy boundaries? Knowing your preferences, your desires, your limits, your deal breakers, right? Your non-negotiables, and having the ability to communicate them when you so choose.
Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hey guys, to be radically transparent, we drink mindfully.
Just like with the food we eat, we are extremely mindful of the drinks that we consume.
We also drink tons of delicious non-alcoholic drinks. You know, the max amount of drinks that I actually like mindfully enjoying on any given night is really 2. After that, I love sipping on something that's good, but doesn't have to be filled with alcohol.
Exactly. Same here. We honor what our bodies tell us, but we love a yummy cocktail. And that's why we absolutely love Damrak Gin. They are the first global gin brand to make both alcoholic and non-alcoholic versions of their gins with 17 botanicals included. Although it wasn't easy to create, their virgin gin tastes just like the real thing with carefully extracted flavors without losing their unique Damrak taste.
Damrak is an authentic Amsterdam gin brand. They pride themselves on being a true Amsterdammer, with their beverages being distilled right in the heart of Amsterdam.
I love Amsterdam.
Can we just go visit?
Yes.
They're proud but accessible, clever and genuine, and edgy but yet deep down smooth and charming, like me. So if you're going to hate me saying this, but it's damn tasty in a gin and tonic served with a slice of orange or 2.
Head to damrakgin.com and use the code IGNITED, IGNTD, all capital, for 10% off your order.
Go get it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets podcast. I'm Dr. Adi Jaffe, and I'm so excited to be here with you today. And I'm even more excited to bring you this incredibly special guest, Terri Cole, who just blew it out the water today, honestly. We talked about so many critically important things related to relationships, and then I kept tying it back to addiction, alcohol struggles, and some of the stuff that Sophie and I typically talk about. But she talked about, obviously, codependency and boundaries and breaking boundaries and trust and a lot of that stuff that we've talked about here before. But then she also put her special twist on it. So we talked about things like silent agreements, a way to do a quick 7-day experiment that will completely change the way you deal with your boundaries. And then we talked about people pleasing. We talked about owning up to your own mistakes in relationships. We talked about how to not just say yes, so right, the power of no that I'm sure you've heard of before. Terri is a powerhouse. She gives you a free gift, but you got to listen to the podcast all the way to the end. And I think this episode alone, along with some of the episodes that Sophie and I have done before, can completely change the reality and the trajectory of your relationship if you put these practices into place. So check it out, listen, see you on the other side. All right, everybody, welcome. We've got the amazing Terri Cole here with us today. This is not news to you who listen to the Ignited podcast, but relationships and addictions, relationship and substance use, relationship and sex addictions and intimacy disorders, etc., they go so hand in hand. It's almost difficult to try to separate them. And Terri, your specialization is around relationships and boundaries and codependency. And so I thought it would be so beautiful to bring you on here and have this discussion, not from the recovery addiction standpoint, but rather from the relationship perspective. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our people, talk about how you got here, and then we'll dive in deeply into that relationship.
Sure. I became a psychotherapist about 24 years ago. So that's how I got here. I was in entertainment. Prior to that, I was negotiating contracts for like supermodels and celebrities. But what brought me really to mental health was my own mental health journey.
Mm,
So I stopped drinking when I was 21. I got into therapy when I was 19. Being, eyes wide open really changed my life, just having a clear head. And why boundaries, and why did I write a book on boundaries, and why am I obsessed with teaching others what healthy boundaries are, is that, in my life, I had really disordered boundaries that I didn't know that's what they were. And they were causing a lot of pain in my relationships and within myself. Like my boundaries within myself, my internal boundaries were really bad as well,
mm,
meaning I wasn't showing up for myself. I wasn't keeping my word to others, not keeping word to myself. So my obsession with boundaries and healthy boundaries and learning them, to the point where I could then teach them. Once I became a psychotherapist, I was like, wow, this is an epidemic. Like, this isn't just me, not just my
yeah.
friends, not just people raised in middle class New Jersey. Like, this is everyone, everywhere, from every socioeconomic and ethnic background,
Yeah.
has no idea what healthy boundaries are and has
Mm,
all of these misunderstandings. And that is when I really was like, then in my psychotherapy practice, I taught it for years, and then I created a course 5 years ago, and just really waited to create the book until I could take the cream and the stuff that is directly impacts the quality of your life and your mental health, because there's a lot of stuff out there on boundaries, but
sure.
I'm very much like, what is the most direct route to do it? And that's why I'm into it. And that's what the book's about.
Mm, I love it. I have some stuff I teach clients about boundaries, and what I find more than anything is most people just literally don't have them. Most people grew up. I equate it, and I'd love to hear your thinking on this. I equate it oftentimes to, imagine if you grow up on land, and you're farming or whatever, and there's a fence. You put a fence around the property in order for the animals to kind of know where to go, and yeah, in some way it fences you in, right? It blocks the full access to all areas available in the world. But what it also does is it keeps everybody within those fences safe, and it allows people to know, so they don't trespass, but also sometimes just so that they know where the end of their access actually is.
Mhm.
Um, and what I find is most of the time people have grown up either with completely non-existent boundaries, and then there were no fences, or fear around boundaries that are so tight and so restrictive that they became themselves a threat.
Mhm.
And I'd love to hear, in the work that you're doing with people on boundaries, how do you find people's past experiences relate to their current struggles in life, and then obviously some of the work that we need to do in order to clear that up.
I think the first thing that will make the conversation the easiest for everyone listening to understand is that, because we have to be on the same page of like, what does it mean to have healthy boundaries? So I've boiled it down to you, listener, you, Andy, you, knowing your preferences, your desires,
Mm,
your limits, your deal breakers, right? Your non negotiables, and having the ability to communicate them when you so choose. That is being masterful when it comes to boundaries. So yes, there's lots of areas, right? We have physical boundaries, sexual boundaries, mental, emotional, material. Okay. Those are the types of boundaries or categories, which
mm,
is they can be too porous, which is too loose. They can be too rigid, which is too tight, as you described. And then in the middle of that is they're healthy, meaning that
yeah.
they are appropriately flexible. That imagining, like you said, so boundaries are like a fence. With a fence, it can say trespassers will be violated, violators will whatever, like you're going to get in trouble if you step over this line.
Yeah.
Personal boundaries are invisible and they're super individual. So you could be in a country like Spain where people who you don't know kiss you. I mean, maybe not since coronavirus, but normally, right? Or you could go to Norway where people are like, nice to meet you, with their hand really far away, and they would never hug you without your permission. Those are
Sure.
culturally accepted stuff. So
Yeah.
back to your question, which is, how does people's past experiences impact their abilities? We have to bring it all the way back
Mm,
to, what did we learn, right? So each one of us has a downloaded boundary blueprint, is what I call it, which is like
Yep.
a schema or a paradigm, right, in your unconscious mind that basically tells you this is how it is in the world. This is how you relate in relationships, professionally, friends, right?
And the important thing I think for a lot of people to understand is it doesn't feel to you like the message is this is how you're supposed to behave. The message is this is how everybody is supposed to behave because you have learned that this is what is appropriate.
Yep.
And I think where we get into a lot of challenges, and I'm sure we'll talk about that pretty soon here, is then people take their learning about what is okay and not okay in terms of boundaries, and they take it out into the world outside of their nuclear family, outside of their home culture. And then they sometimes don't realize this, but what they come up against is the fact that, hey, guess what? Other people's boundaries are completely different than yours.
Yep. And that's okay. And
Yeah.
why it's so incredibly important to learn to, as I call it in the subtitle of the book, talk true, is because nobody can read your mind.
Mm.
And there are a lot of like lies we'll tell ourselves, right? To avoid having hard boundary conversations or simply making a boundary request. Someone's bad behavior, right? We make up stories. We say, oh, it's always hard for him in the fourth quarter. I know he didn't mean it when he screamed at me last night. So it's not a big deal. Partly, and I've seen this with my therapy clients over the last 25 years, partly because you don't want to have the conversation, mainly because you don't know
Conflict.
how. Say it again.
And the conflict.
Yes. Avoiding conflict, but also not knowing how. People wait. It's like a language. So learning boundaries, becoming fluent is literally learning a language.
100%.
And you wouldn't make yourself wrong if you didn't wake up tomorrow fluent in Mandarin, right?
No.
You wouldn't be like, what's wrong? I must be weak. What's wrong with me? You would go, oh, I need a good teacher. I need to
Yeah.
put in a little time. I want to be fluent in a language I never studied. So that's the way that I look at it. Anyway, so yeah, what's next?
No, I think that's we use that example all the time in terms of, you're speaking English, your partner is speaking Chinese, and you wonder why you're not relating to one another. And you hit on something that I want to talk about. And conflict itself has the same sort of issues, right? And you can talk about it as a boundary alone, right? So some people get very uncomfortable with conflict, and their boundary is I don't want to fight, I don't want to yell, I don't want to have any of that around. And then unfortunately, what can happen sometimes is that creates a barrier to having the honest conversation, to having the transparent exchange of, hey, let me communicate to you what feels safe to me so that so it's on the table, so we know what it is. And then you can communicate your version of that. And then we can sit around, because what normally happens in relationship, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but what happens in relationships a lot of times is if you're in for the long haul, there may be a reworking of boundaries in a way that then is safe for both people. Because if you show up, like I want to give this example, right? I think telling stories is always so important for people to really connect deeply. Sophie and I have been together about 16, 17 years now. She moved in to live with me maybe about 2 years into the relationship. And I was living in a 1-bedroom apartment in like, it's funny, if you live in LA, Beverly Hills adjacent. I have some funny stories about that alone. But long story short, she moved in this apartment with me. And not 2-3 months maybe after she was living with me in this 1-bedroom, she comes home one day and she says, hey, my friend Lydia is going to come spend the night. And I'm like, who's Lydia? And why is she sleeping at my house? Plus, where is she sleeping? We have a 1-bedroom.
Right.
Where is your friend Lydia, who I've never met before, sleeping? Now, I didn't have any of this languaging, but obviously what was coming up for me, I was telling Sophie this, it sounded insane to her, and I'll explain why in a moment. I can count on 0 fingers how many sleepovers I had when I was a kid. We had none. There were none. By the way, in my neighborhood, as far as I know, there were none. None of my friends had sleepovers. That wasn't a thing. We all lived really close to one another, but we didn't sleep at each other's houses. Sophie grew up in a house that had complete open door policy.
Yep.
People were crashing all the time. So my wife, who doesn't know this about me, is telling me a friend is coming to sleep over. And I'm going, I don't even know this human being. Why are they sleeping at my house? And what are they going to do? She ended up sleeping on the couch in our living room. But I didn't have this ability to share. And I couldn't have said to her, hey, I don't feel that comfortable with people I don't know coming and sleeping in my house. And Sophie didn't have the wherewithal and the ability to say, oh, I grew up in a house where this was just a thing that happened all the time. So it led to a fight. And we didn't even
Sure.
know what we were really fighting about,
Right.
because we thought we were fighting about this friend coming to sleep over. We weren't. We were fighting about how do we see the world around hosting and
Yep.
interacting with others.
Yep. It's such a great story, because it's literally, you could take that story when you said it's not about, it looked like it's about the friend, not about the friend, because always from a psychological point of view, when we're in conflict, even if the conflict is real, right? You still have to work that thing out. She's staying, she's
Sure.
not staying, but there's a parallel process going on pretty much always. And when you have had enough therapy, you're able to, and as you said, now we didn't have the insight then to go, let me look at some historical stuff. Let me look at why I'm feeling either threatened or uncomfortable with this. Why is it important to Sophie? Why, like, all the things that you now have this capacity to do. But that is a boundary issue. And it's funny, family systems where there was not a lot of others coming in and out of the family system, the home,
Oh yeah.
that is more of a closed family system. There's
Oh yeah.
different rules around how we interact with the world.
Yep.
Open family systems, that is different. And so it's interesting that you were both drawn to each other. And it makes so much sense, and I'm sure for a million other reasons, but that there's something kind of fascinating that we resonate with people who are the same as us in some ways, and then people who are different than us in some ways, you know?
So true. So true. And it definitely makes for something more interesting. It's only in the last few years that we realized, even underlying that, or that I realized, and I'm realizing more of it as we're having this conversation. One of the big aspects of that actually is even a layer beneath what was our hosting of other people like. And it was the difference between her saying, my friend is coming to stay the night, and her asking,
Oh, absolutely.
hey, is it okay if my friend comes and spends the night?
Yep.
And one was an assumption that I just have
Yep.
to do whatever she feels like doing. And the other was being inclusive and including me in the decision making.
Yep.
And I think that's the value of what we're talking about here around boundaries is, if you don't talk to others and you don't explain and you don't do the inner searching, as you mentioned, to actually be able to define what are your boundaries, where is the fence, then guess
Mhm.
what? People are going to walk all over your fence. They're going to break through it. They're going to jump over it because they don't know there's a fence there.
Right. And really, they're not doing anything. So I always say, let's start at the beginning, where we just get super clear, like right now in your life, anyone listening, watching, what is okay and not okay with you. So I do an exhaustive exercise in the beginning of the book, so that we're really looking at all areas of life where there are things you know right now that are bothering you, that are annoying you, and a lot of these things we could change. A lot of them, I say, we look at our homes, our home offices, wherever we are, the apartment, wherever you're living. Are there things that are not okay with you, but you just leave? You just go, I hate that overhead light. It's so caustic. It's so
Mm,
bright. It kills me. I never want to put it on, but it's the only light in the room. When for literally $10, you could buy a new light at Target today, or you could change that bulb and care about your own preferences,
it's so
prioritize.
it's so funny. We have these LED lights in our ceilings, and I changed most of them to a warmer light because they were the coldest,
Yep.
brightest version. Because I guess the people who sold the house wanted to just, everything be bright and
Yep.
airy. But then you're sort of in the middle of the night. You can't look at yourself. And there's one LED light that is on a different switch that I didn't
Huh?
take out because it's above Sophie's dresser, and so it rarely gets turned on, like maybe once a week. And every time she turns it on, I go into like anaphylactic shock. My body just goes and half into convulsions because it's so debilitating, the anxiety provoking, considering all the other lights we have.
Mm-hmm.
And weirdly, as you're talking about it now, I only remember it when it's causing the aggravation.
Yep.
And the moment it gets turned off, it flies out of my consciousness. and I don't take care of it, even though it would be about, I think I still have some of the new LEDs. So it would probably take me about 8 minutes to
Yep.
fix it forever.
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 Keep in mind, when you do an okay and not okay list, you have this, you're looking in black and white at the things that you could change and things within your relationship that perhaps need your attention, or your relationships could be with siblings. They text instead of call you. You'd prefer that they call. You don't say anything. They call you during working hours. You'd rather they not. These are all ways of, we can be so proactive with some of our preferences, because think about what boundaries are, right? They're preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers. That's really all they are. So if you feel overwhelmed, like, I don't know where to start. A lot of people feel like they have terrible boundaries, but they don't know where to start. So I always say, listen, if you think you got terrible boundaries, but you don't know where to start by not giving anyone an auto yes. Like, just stop with the people pleasing, buy some time, and start to learn to say, hey, I have to check with Sophie. I'll get back to you tomorrow. Or I need to check with my partner. I need to check with whomever. So you're not giving an insta yes.
How beautiful is it even to, and how empowering could it even be to go, hey, thank you for asking me. Let me think about that for a couple of minutes. I'll get back to you. I'm just gonna really see how that resonates, and then I'll get back to you. Like, to claim back the power to make a decision, not in the moment. You're not. It's like when you're mentioning that people pleasing component, I'm almost thinking of like car buying. You know how they try to make you just make a decision. Well, you know, if you leave right now, it's going to go up in price. Why? Why
I always,
does it go up in price?
can I tell you, when people try this salesman thing, and even friends, anyone who says, well, if you want to do it, I need an answer by 3:00 today. Like, first of all, poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency for me. So I don't give a shit what time you need it. So if you need it by 3:00 today, it's a no now, because that is not the way I decide, because I don't like to do it like that. And that is my right.
Boom.
To claim my time, right?
And that's what I mean, right? It's so beautiful to just, everybody talks about the power of no now. It's a pretty popular thing. But what you're saying is, even before you deliver the no, just take a pause and say to yourself, well, let me think. I don't know if I want to do this. I'm giving you an I don't know. And that's even almost more powerful than no, right? Because no is, yes, if it's clearly something you don't want to do, then by all means, right, say no. But how about we reclaim our time to decide, like reclaim our the value that we have in just listening to our internal feelings, notions, visceral response. And sometimes we're not ready to make a decision right there in the moment.
Right. But I think it's always, that's a fact. And when you have been habituated to say yes, this process of taking 7 days where there will be no saying yes in the moment, you will only tell the person, I will get back to you tomorrow. I'll get back to you after I talk to my person. I will. And we can always be nice. Here's the thing. A lot of times, these are people we love asking us to do things. These are people we really enjoy. So you can always say, I so appreciate you thinking about us. I really do. I love that you include us, and I need till tomorrow to know. Or I'm not positive I want to do it. I have an early thing the next day. So let me think about it. And is it okay if I let you know tomorrow? Again, so much of the time, these are people who we actually care about. And that, a lot of times, if you have, the disease to please, that is what inspires the insta yes. But we really have to get so clear that your friends right now. Think, every person listening, think about your friends who who just say yes because they're super nice. They don't want to offend you. They don't want you to be hurt. I know my friends who have the disease to please. I love them anyway. But when they say yes, I don't trust their yes. I go, well, she always says yes. So it's probably 50% chance she's going to do it. So it makes you untrustworthy. We're doing these things because most of us, especially women, were raised and praised to be self-abandoning codependents. Like, fact. We got praise. for being as self, everything for you and nothing for me. Be nice, think of others. I mean, when you were raised to be a woman, at least when I was raised, and all the women who I teach, being nice, being perceived as being nice was more important than anything else.
Yeah.
It was like the virtue above all others. And yet, truthfully, when we think about it, is it freaking nice to say yes when you want to say no? Like, actually, it's giving the people in your life corrupted intelligence about who you are.
Mm. I think this is a really important thing for people to listen to, because it comes from both sides, right? It's a woman's agency to make decisions even and assert herself, right? We know this, and it's becoming so much more public and well known. But this whole idea that when women start really asserting themselves and really letting you know how they feel, then there's all we have all these terms for that, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're bossy and they're a bitch and they're all like
Yep.
we have names for those kinds of women, which is really what it's doing, is because we're really big on the fuck shame thing here, is we're kind of shaming them back into, hey, be
Yeah.
nice. Just don't forget, just
That's right.
be agreeable. And then on the other side, as a man, that idea of like, as a man, you should be able to handle it. Just don't complain. Don't talk about what's going on for you.
Mhm.
See the thing, go do it, which for men on the other side is a different kind of a yes. But,
Yeah.
and again, I'm very clear. I'm making broad generalizations about masculinity and femininity here.
Sure.
And there are obviously massive deviations. But if I even move from male and female to masculine and feminine, and those dichotomies, right, that polarity that exists, what it's saying partially is we've already made the decision for you. We're almost asking you rhetorically if you're willing to do this thing or not. There are these social rules about what you're supposed to answer.
Right. In the book, I call them silent agreements, right? That we have all of these silent agreements within family systems, within marriages, within friendships. And I'm really big on putting words on all of those things, because you really want it to be expressed. If you don't want to agree, like think about like I was raised in a pretty waspy household, like middle class, but nobody was talking about anything that was upsetting, anything that was real. You weren't allowed to get mad about anything. It was like no real conversation happened.
No
My father was
emotion.
no, please don't. Especially if my father was around.
Please don't.
Please don't.
I'm sorry. I have a feeling. Please don't.
Yeah, just hold on to that until you're alone, please. But what happens is it's not just my family, right? Of course, we all learn that there are certain forbidden emotions or forbidden stuff. So my family forbidden emotion was anger. So of course, you don't think that doesn't mean we weren't angry. We were, but then what happens? Goes underground, becomes upsetness, like I was allowed to be upset. So even well into my adult life, I remember my college boyfriend being like, wait, so you're saying I can never get mad? I was like, yes.
Yes.
Like,
why is that weird to you? I do not understand.
Totally. I was like, that's definitely what I'm saying. He's like, I don't know that I can never get mad though. I was like, well, never get mad at me, never get mad to me, never get mad around me. He's like, oh my God. Now, obviously I worked that out through therapy, because you can't
Not
live
obviously,
a
but you
life.
did.
I did. That's correct. No,
A lot of people have not worked that out.
Well, I became a freaking psychotherapist though. Trust me, it took decades, but I did work it out, because we need that full spectrum. And when we're not allowed, you so much of my numbing behavior in my youth was about, I don't want to feel these feelings. I don't know how to process or express or talk about, because I had no model of behavior to do it.
Yeah.
So don't expect to be good at boundaries. You probably didn't have a good model. Most people didn't.
We had
But you
to.
can
My
learn
dad
it.
was Scandinavian.
Oh,
And my mom is a daughter of a Holocaust survivor. So
oh,
there was this combination of, Scandinavians are very much like, do the work you have to do, shut up about it. I don't want to
yep.
hear about it. It's
Mhm.
just move on. And again, right, grew up in super cold, very stark reality. And so I totally get where it comes from, but that's what it translates to. And then for my mom's family, it's just be happy you have food and nobody's coming to kill you
Yep.
is sort of the standard, right? And everything else is a blessing. Don't even ask for anything more. And so, yeah, definitely grew up in that world. I didn't understand emotions. I didn't know they were a thing. I mean, it was such a, I actually teach this little workshop on the feelings wheel to help primarily men literally learn the language of emotional expression. You mentioned before boundary language, and I used the same kind of analogy around emotions.
We get so many messages, comments, and emails from so many of you listeners from our community on how much our podcast and Ignited has supported your growth and your life, that our presence has become a form of mentorship.
And in order to continue that support and to connect more deeply with some of you in our community, I've recently joined MentorCam, an app that connects you to experts like myself that you just may not otherwise have access to for personalized one-on-one advice and ongoing mentorship. You can find experts on a variety of topics related to career development, dating and relationships, and health and wellness, with whom you can connect and engage with in a private conversation through video messages in the app. Each and every message is purposefully created to answer your specific question.
Mentoring is invaluable. We are creatures of habit and comfort, but to continue to grow and better ourselves in our society, we need to step out of our own bubble, out of our own way, and tap into the power of one another, which is exactly what MentorCam allows us to do.
And I want to make myself available to as many of you as I can. And so for our Ignited listeners, I'm doing a special promotion. I'm offering a response to your first question on MentorCam for only $1.99. So if I don't think you can get away with $1.99 for an answer from me at this point.
No.
You can download the app in the App Store on your iPhone or Android device by searching for MentorCam. And so just download the app and ask me your question. Let's dive deeper. You know, a lot of women that I work with, and again, I'm sorry, I'm being very, very heteronormative in this conversation. A lot of partners talk to me about the fact that their loved one who's struggling with addiction doesn't connect and doesn't communicate. And when it comes down to it, it's partially because they literally don't have the words to communicate. So if you ask somebody how they're doing and they have 3 words for how they're doing, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm tired.
Right.
That's what they got. Hey, how you doing? I'm good. Well, what do you mean you're good? Well, I told you, I'm not bad and I'm not tired, so I'm good. What else? What do you want from me? And it takes time to literally develop the understanding of language. Is something I learned in anthropology back in undergrad. But you know, there are these native tribes around the world, and when they were studied around their understanding of color, it became clear that not just that the words obviously for yellow, green, blue, red, etc. are different, but some cultures had different groupings of colors. So for instance, maybe they wouldn't have yellow. Maybe the word for what we talk about as yellow didn't exist. They would still see that thing. It just became part of a different group. And for them, that was a hue of green.
Right.
And they would see the thing and they would call it green. And the, you know, the anthropologist studying this had this real deep knowledge of the fact that things belong in categories. Things are explained the way that we explain them because of the language we were given to explain them in. So if you grew up with 3 colors, you know, black, white, and blue, most of the colors you'd see would just fit into black, white, or blue. That's just how you would deal with it. And that explains a lot about the way we function in the world in general. But if you ask somebody who grew up in a household, maybe like we did, Terry, and you ask them how they're feeling, well, I'm going to choose from a very limited palette of colors because those were the ones that I was taught, not because I don't have other emotions, as you mentioned. And
Right.
I think at the core, that's where a lot of these needs to numb, to hide, to use drugs, to use porn, to run away from relationships. I think this is where a lot of them come from.
Oh, yeah. It's not being self-expressed. And I mean, I teach people to be fully self-expressed, which is amazing, but not being accurately self-expressed
Accurately.
it's so lonely, and my poor husband, I always think it's not like a day at the beach being married to me, in that I need to be very succinctly and specifically understood. So there will be no placating. There is no like, yeah, I got you. I'm like, no. And I remember when we were first together, I'd said to him, I would just randomly say, what are you thinking about? And he'd be like, nothing. Why? Like what? Nothing's wrong. I'm like, I didn't. And I remember saying to him, babe, I'm interested in everything about you. I'm interested in what you're thinking about. He's like, but it's nothing significant. I was like, all right. But of course, now 25 years later, we're always being like, what are you thinking about?
Yeah.
Because we share so much mental and emotional intimacy. And it wasn't a demand. It isn't like you can't have your own private thoughts. It's that even when he's thinking about nothing important, I'm interested in what he's thinking.
Because you want to
But
know him. Because you want to
yes,
know him.
yes.
He's your partner.
Yes, I
This
am
is
extremely interested in him still all these years
and by
later.
the way, what I found is, because we have this, Sophie and I have this all the time, and I was absolutely on the side of, oh, nothing or work. Like those are really the two answers pretty much. And
Mhm.
now what I realize sometimes is I'll have a thought and I'll be thinking about it when Sophie answers it or asks me the question. And it doesn't seem that important. So what were you thinking about? Oh, just thinking about Tuesday and this thing that's coming up. But especially if there's some anxiety going on or something along those lines, that thought was triggered by something that was happening in the moment or something that just happened 5 minutes ago. And those things are relevant experiences to share.
Mhm.
Oh, I was talking to Steve earlier and this thing came up and it just really reminded me that I'm not ready for next week. Just something like that. Because what do we really care about? And this gets back to that emotional color conversation. I want to know my partner. I want to know the people in my life. I want to be able to share. And that's what intimacy is, right? Is sharing the true experience. Um, and
Yes,
so I'm not asking about the details so much. And she's not asking about the details. She's asking about the experience I'm having.
yes. And here's the thing. Let's talk about emotional boundaries in relationships, right? There's so much of the time we are, and this is definitely men and women. I have more experience with cis women. That's been my experience over the years. So I know for sure that this clientele are highly codependent. So not necessarily codependent in the Melody Beatty, everyone's involved with addicts codependency, but in the way of overfunctioning, overgiving, overthinking, overdoing,
Mm.
overfeeling in all of our relationships. And the realization I had in my 20s about this, but it is a boundary issue, because when someone is having a problem and we go, I have the answer. I know what you should do. I made a phone call. I made an email. Did you do this? Did you think
Mm.
about this? What about this? I cut out an article for you. Like, I could keep going. I won't, but I could. What we're doing is we are centering ourselves in the middle of that person's problem. And why we're doing it, which was like a painful experience in my 20s, how I figured this out through therapy, is that the other person's dumpster fire of a life, or whatever I think is happening, is messing with my internal peace. So I want to fix them, quote unquote, so I could get back to not being anxious. Now that is codependency.
Because
When-
your emotional needs are dependent on other people's level of emotional functioning.
Exactly. How can that be? And so anyone listening who's like, I don't know, I'm just helpful. I just love to help other people, because I do too. This is what I'm going to have you check. If you want to see, are you functioning in this codependent way,
Mm.
is always check your urgency. So if, your wife comes to you with an issue, if your urgency, if it becomes a compulsion to fix the thing that's happening right now. And listen, there are moments that's appropriate if someone is injured. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about they've got a problem that is their side
Ran
of
out of milk. Ran out of milk. Right.
yeah, but ran out of milk is not going to make anybody have urgency, right?
I got a 3-year-old baby that
Oh, I
naps
know.
with a milk bottle. That could be
Good point. You're like, actually, no running out of milk. That will be
Right.
urgency for everyone. But it's looking at, do I feel compelled to take action that I haven't even asked them about, right? They didn't even tell me. They're not asking me to do it. And even if they are, we want to look at,
They're not even asking me to do it.
oh no, we were just volunteers, you know. This has to do though with emotional intimacy and knowing other people. Because when you can stay on your own side of the street and someone that you love has a problem, we can say things like, well, let's just start with, where are you in this? What do you think you should do?
Hmm.
What is your feeling? What does your gut say? Because your gut is good. I trust that. So it takes so much, for me, it took so much of me working on my ego to not want to center myself because, you know, I'm a psychotherapist. I do quote unquote have answers. But even when I wasn't a psychotherapist, I was always very involved in other people's lives, you know? So we can let people make their own mistakes and come to their own conclusions. If they want to brainstorm, that's a different story. Someone says, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a business. I want to, you know, spitball some things with you and brainstorm with you." That's different than someone coming to you and being like, "I'm in a jam."
I think there's something that I really want to pull out of this for a lot of people. I think it goes even beyond let people make their own mistakes because it saves us. If you're really there to help and you want other people to do well, it helps them,
Of course.
right? And I'm thinking to myself, I mean, there's so many examples with clients, like, you know, in the work that we do. Initially, I think a lot of us get so enmeshed with our client's experience that when a client isn't doing well, our life goes to shit.
Oh,
A client's having an emergency. I can't talk to my wife. I can't be at home. I need to fix. And eventually you realize, you know, whatever, I'm only 12 years into this or whatever, but eventually you realize I can't run my life that way. I have to quit this job if I'm going to do that. And if you don't, then what ends up happening is that you will burn out trying to put everybody else's fires while your
yeah,
house potentially is on fire itself.
without a doubt. Also, the thing that really cured me of this in my therapy practice, because, you
Yeah,
know, I've been doing this a long time now, but in the beginning, I was still dealing with my own codependency,
of course.
is that it is really bad for my clients.
Yeah.
I was not doing them a service by having some disordered boundaries with them. That to be the best therapist that I can be is to have rock solid, transparent boundaries. And I'm not saying if someone has an emergency, I wouldn't be there for them. Of course I would. But being proactive in my practice so they knew what our interactions were going to be. They knew how long it might take me to get back to them. They understood when they should pay and the way that they were paying, and not setting people up to fail.
Yeah.
And not needing to be their friend, right? Not needing to be liked, needing really making my decisions from a therapeutic point of view. What is the most appropriate and effective intervention for this client? It is not them being my pal,
No.
you know?
And modeling, right? We're talking about boundaries here, modeling boundaries for them. I had a client who's diagnosed as borderline. I actually really, really hate diagnoses, but she was diagnosed as borderline, and she would do this thing where I was the savior and I was the best thing that's ever happened to her in her life. And then sometimes that would mean she felt like I had to answer a question or resolve a thing for her.
Yep.
I'd get emails at 11, 3 a.m., 6 a.m. And sometimes there'd be 13 emails in a row in, you know, the span of 4 hours. And I wouldn't respond. Initially I would respond at the beginning of the workday, and I would try to answer one of the emails, and then, you know, the litany of emails would continue. And one day I just had a conversation with her. This happened multiple times. So once when it started, I had a conversation with her. I said, look, there's no world where I'm answering a 3 a.m. email. I just want you to understand I have a life and I work within my work hours. And I fully appreciate that there will be things that will feel to you like pressure and like stress. If you're actually having an emergency, I need you to call 911
Yep.
and have medical attention and care. I can't give that to you anyway, no matter what time of the day it is.
Sure. Sure.
And secondly, if I make it seem like it's okay to email me 15 times so that you get a response, I'm going to destroy this relationship. I'm going to make you think that the right way to get through to me is to just yell at me louder through the email system. I respect you fully, and I will respect you always. And that's never going to be the way to get my attention. And it took a couple of tries, but she told me at a later point that she learned that's not how I function. And so I'm not saying for a second she stopped functioning that way with anybody else.
Sure.
But
But
after
that's not your side of the street, right? Your
not my-
side of the street was being clear about your boundaries with
and
her.
what ended up happening is the thing that everybody tells you can't happen in borderline cases. And that was there was only one more occurrence like that in about 3 years of knowing her.
Amazing.
And she just learned he's not the person to do this with. And my sense is if more people around her held strong boundaries,
Yep.
it would end with a lot of them. And eventually the mirror would have to turn back in and she would have to sit with it. And then there's a lot of discovery to be done in that moment.
Yeah, that's a great story, though, a great illustration of boundaries are loving.
Yes.
Being transparent about your boundaries is actually an act of courage, but because you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable, especially if you're sharing your preferences, right? Because we're not required to do those things. But when you think about what are the things that make you uniquely you, they are your preferences, desires, limits, and deal breakers. Those are literally the things that make you you. So when we feel like telling someone our preference is like a burden to them, oh, you know me, no fuss, no muss, I'm easygoing, that seems to be some badge of honor, especially that women have learned. If we're talking again about heteronormative. And listen, I was raised in the 60s, 70s, right? So, I mean, I was born in 64, but it's like, I'm hoping it's better now for kids who are being raised. But most of my clients were raised at a similar time. And I'm finding them very young. I mean, my biggest age is now really millennials. And they have the same exact
Yeah.
disease to please issues around boundaries. But when you think about it, the people in your life, allowing them to know you. And it doesn't mean they always acquiesce to what we want. It doesn't mean you
Sure.
always give in to what they want, right? This is what an actual compromise or negotiating for our needs. And so many of my clients, it's almost like the thought of actually negotiating for their needs seemed, behavior unbecoming, so to speak.
Such an important lesson for everybody to listen to, right? Do not make the mistake that following these rules and expressing your boundaries means you get everything you want. Number one. Actually, the more you learn to appreciate this, the more you learn that other people's boundaries are equally as valuable as yours. And then you get to make the really obvious decision, which is how much do I care about this relationship? How much do I want to give to you? How much can I let go of my need to be right or to be served in this moment and serve you? But you get to make an actual decision versus what you're saying happens a lot, which is, I love that, the silent agreements.
Right. And the automatic interaction sort of where we're thinking now, what is it that I actually want? And can I respect what you want? But if you're a people pleaser, and if you've been a people pleaser, trust me, when people say no to you after you've sucked it up for like decades, you're so pissed. You can't believe the nerve that Betty has, for being honest. You're like, Betty, doesn't she know those are not the rules, man? And we don't want to live in that world, because a world where we're being more truthful, it helps you become more of your actual unique self. We don't have to fit into this, whatever that container is that someone else decided was what male is, what female is, what healthy is. Like we get to decide those things, because I promise you, I've had clients come into my office in their 5th and 6th decades of life with all their shit together. They're like, kids are on track, going to Ivy League schools, doing this, doing that, money in the bank. I like my partner still. I go to Soul Cycle. I do whatever. Why do I feel so empty? Is this the way I'm supposed to feel? And a lot of those people have what I call shadow addictions, where, they're not getting wasted every night, but they're definitely using alcohol as a way to numb these feelings of emptiness.
Look, we built a culture around it, for crying out loud, right? Like that it's it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and happy hour as a concept,
Yep.
both of them. I mean, what does happy hour mean other than you're miserable everywhere else? Here you get to be happy. Like that's the only way you can interpret what happy hour would
Uh-huh.
mean. And why? Why do we create such a life where we just assume we have to be miserable the rest of the time?
Right.
Um, it's asinine, and
Yep.
yet it's also a lot of people's reality. So I think you're right. And this is, by the way, why I have such an issue with people believing that, and it's why I hate labels, that addicts and alcoholics are different. I think the only thing that really happens is there are people for whom that external pressure, oftentimes also because of breaking boundaries. So this is the first time I'm going to say this, but I'll talk to you after as well. I
Mhm.
can't wait. We're going to do a don't just say yes or boundaries workshop for ignited people. Somehow we're going to figure it out. But
Love it.
um this concept that you just have to put up at the rest of the time, and you got to find your breaks where you can. To me, that's part of where addiction gets created.
Mhm.
I lived a pretty privileged life. So the
Mhm.
crap I had to put up with was pretty mild, and yet I rebelled against it. And yet I went to drugs. And yet when my girlfriends broke up with me, I went into deep depression because I thought I'll be alone for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
But I work with people who've had big T trauma or multiple chronic little T trauma for decades.
Yep.
And I look at their life and I don't question why they started shooting up heroin or drinking
Right.
all day, every day, or smoking meth or doing a bunch of blow. I'm like, oh, I'm impressed you survived to this moment, to be perfectly honest. And when you realize that, and you're having the conversation you're having right now, Terry, about helping them reclaim their power, not showing them they're powerless, helping them reclaim their power. No, 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 wait. You get to put a fence around what makes you feel safe. People fucked with you in the past, and that's okay. It is what it is. It got you
Right.
here. But we get to build a fence, and you help them understand and erect a fence around what feels safe to them, saying to them always, you get to renegotiate these boundaries whenever you want, by the way.
Yep.
They're not set in stone. It is, I've seen it. I mean, we had a group right before I recorded this with you. I see people of all ages, of all genders, of all socioeconomic status. You see the light in their face when they realize they have the power to make decisions about what they do in life. It's magical.
Oh, it's amazing. And reading for me with the book, reading, you hope you write a book, you hope that it translates the way you think it's going to, right? Make it as accessible as possible. And to read the reviews of people just being like, oh my God, like the light bulb went on. I feel so much less anxious because now I'm not so afraid to say
Mm.
no, or I'm not so afraid. I don't have to do everything my mother-in-law is trying to make me do. I'm not doing these messed up boundary dances with people anymore, you know?
So powerful, so amazing. Um, can you tell everybody where can they find your stuff, Terry? How do they connect and learn more from you?
Sure. You can go to get the book. It's called Boundary Boss: The Essential Guide to Talk True, Be Seen, and Finally Live Free. So you can go to boundarybossbook.com because there's still a ton of bonus. I just can't take them away. I just want you to have them all. So, and if you've bought the books, a lot of people have, and you haven't claimed your bonuses, go to boundarybossbook.com and you can still claim your bonuses. My website is terricole.com. I've got a podcast that you were on called The Terri Cole Show that we just had our 2 millionth download. Woo woo. Um, and I hang out on Instagram mostly. I mean, I have a free group for women on Facebook that we do a lot of, just continue this conversation, probably about 30,000 women in there. And Instagram, I'm just at Terri Cole.
That's so amazing. And you did promise me you were going to give our ignited people something special.
I did, and I am. So you're going to go to get your gift, you're going to go to boundaryboss.me/ignited, spelled the way these guys spell it, IGNDT. And it is actually codependency and boundaries.
Mm.
And so it's like a little video, and you're going to answer a bunch of questions, which is going to help you see where you are personally sort of on the scale with these codependent behaviors so that you know where to start.
I love it. Thank you so much for offering that to our people. And again, right, I always tell our people that in recovery, the alcohol is not the problem, the drugs are not the problem. Your job is to actually figure out what is the underlying problem. And oftentimes boundaries and relationships are at the core of so many of the addiction issues I see. So I can't wait for everybody to get your book and check it out and get to learn so much from everything that you share with them. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was awesome. And yes, let's do a boundary thing for whomever.
Cannot wait. Cannot wait. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget to take a screenshot of this. Tag Terri, tag me. I want to hear the biggest lessons you had from this, and have an amazing weekend. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you, so please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.